and his three friends. Now, there are many lessons we can learn from the four people, but I want to focus on how they handle trials, because we're all going to face trials in our life, and it's human nature to avoid trials. We try to fix all the problems, make everything go away, but it's godly nature to persevere through them. We're going to have trials. How can we overcome them? So when trials come, don't flee or panic. God can do something profound in them. It'll either shape you or it'll demonstrate his kingdom. So think of the trial that Daniel faced when he was told not to pray. He could have said, oh, it's just for 1 month. I won't pray for 1 month. But he didn't. He didn't panic. He trusted God. He continued to pray 3 times a day. Then he was thrown into the lion's den. And through it all, at the end, King Darius was able to witness how God delivered and rescued Daniel from the power of the lions, and he wrote a decree that said, men need to tremble and fear the living God of Daniel. So they recognize. So let me ask you children this. When do stars shine the brightest? When are the stars the brightest? Does anybody know? At night, but when it's the darkest. When it's the darkest night, that gives the stars an opportunity to shine the brightest. So it's going to be in our lives. When times feel really hard and heavy and dark, that gives us an opportunity to shine bright. Now, Jesus told us, don't hide our candle under a bushel. He's telling us, let it shine. So there's times when some of you smaller ones have to share your toys when you don't want to, but that gives you an opportunity to shine. Or you might have to forgive someone who did you wrong. Or you might have to love someone who's been unkind to you. But that gives you an opportunity to let your light shine. Now, the story we're going to talk about today is a little girl named Hadassah and her uncle Mordecai. Okay? Now, the story, this is the same remember that same King Nebuchadnezzar who had that 90-foot statue? This same king made war with Jerusalem, and he captured the men and the girls and all those. It was Daniel, his 3 friends, and it was Mordecai, and then Esther got captured that same time. And Mordecai, I don't know if Esther's mom and dad got killed when they made war with Jerusalem, but anyway, Hadassah didn't have a father and mother, so Mordecai adopted her and took her in. And I just gave it away. I was going to ask you guys if you know the name of Hadassah, and I just said Esther. So do you guys remember Daniel and his 3 friends? Do you remember any of their names? So when they captured them, they gave them all new names. I have 2 children, one named Azariah from that story, and one named Hadassah, Esther, but both of those names got changed. So it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those 3 names was Azariah, and I can't say the other 2, I don't forget. But then Hadassah's name was changed to Esther, so they could hide their identity, or the Babylonians just changed their names. So, in the darkest of the times for Esther, for her people, the Jews, she sure did shine bright. So let's get right into the story. And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, I'm just going to call him Xerxes, because I think that was the same king. So in those days, when Xerxes sat on the throne of his kingdom, it was in Shushan, the palace, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes. So this was a very powerful king. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar was a powerful king. Then this king came after him, and he was also powerful. So he wanted to show he had 127 provinces, I think, and he wanted to show them all how wealthy he was and all the things that he had. So he made a big feast for 180 days, it says. That is 6 months that he demonstrated how much power and wealth, and he fed everyone. And he had a bunch of decorations around. There were white, green, blue hanging fastened with cords. There was purple, silver rings, pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver. That's how wealthy he was. And upon the pavement of red, blue, and white, there was black marble. So it was just beautiful how he portrayed his wealth. And then it says, they gave them to drink in vessels of gold, and the vessels being diverse from one another. So all the cups they had were vessels of gold, but they were all made differently. Now, when you go in our cupboard, we have a lot of different cups and bowls, but it's because one set got broken, we added another one. This is opposite. He on purpose said, I want every cup to be different because I just have enough money to make everyone different. We just don't want to spend the money to make ours all the same. So he wanted to show everyone how wealthy he was, and he was doing a good job. And then after this 6 months trial, he had his special people on the top that probably divided it in half, and he had a 7-day feast. And in those 7 days, the queen also had her people. The queen had her little feast, and the king had his little feast. And in those 7 days, the king started drinking some wine. And he said, I have shown everyone everything that I have, all my money, my wealth, my food. But there's one thing that I want to show the people that I have, and that's my wife. And he ordered that Queen Vashti be brought in front of all these men so he could show how beautiful she was. And when the servant came and told Vashti that the king wants you to come out and they want to all look at you and see how beautiful she is, she said, no way. I don't know if she knew the king was drinking. I don't know why she said no, but she refused. And that made the king so mad. He was because he thought he was all powerful. He had all this. And here he was humbled in front of his top men from these other. Your queen doesn't even obey you. And he was furious, it says. Now, one thing about King Xerxes that you need to realize, he was a very powerful man, but he had a very bad temper. One day when they were going through all these provinces to take over, there was a big sea or a big waterway there that they couldn't cross. So he told his army, build a bridge across it. And they built a bridge. And before the army went across, let's say that night, a big storm came. And the waves crashed over the bridge and the bridge broke. The king was so mad, he told his army, take chains and go out and whip the water. Then take hot iron and burn the water. Now you have to throw handcuffs in it because the water did not submit to my authority. That's how mad he was. Then all the people that made the bridge, he had them killed because he said, you should have done a better job. So now you can understand this king just had a terrible temper. And when she did not obey, he was very angry with her. And he said, now what are we going to do with the queen because she has not performed to your commandment? So the people sitting there said, well, get rid of her. If it please the king, let there be a royal commandment. Or he said, because if other people see that the queen isn't obeying you, that then the other people's wives won't obey them. So he said, let's make a law. Let's write a letter. So the king had letters sent out. He had a bunch of letters sent out and said it needs to go to every household, every family, saying that every man should bear in his own house, that it should be published in every language. So let's say there were Amish, there were Spanish, there were whatever. They couldn't read English. In every language it was written, because he was the king over all of these, that all the men have their wives have to submit to their husbands. So that was a big decree. So after all those things, years went by. He got rid of his queen. And when the wrath of the king was appeased, when he finally calmed down, he realized that he had no queen. Then the king's servants that ministered under said, well, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And so let the maiden which pleased the king be queen instead of Vashti, and the thing pleased the king, and so he did. So he sent out through all the provinces for the pretty young women that weren't married, and they came from all over because they all wanted to be queen, right? But then we remember Esther, who Mordecai raised up, who I was telling you about. He raised her up, but he told Esther that don't let them know that you're Jewish. So she came into the picture, and it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, many maidens were gathered unto Shushan, the palace, and Esther was brought in also. Now it said the maiden pleased the caretaker that was taking care of all these women that came in and giving them a place to live, that this caretaker gave Esther 7 maidens just to take care of her, because he seen she was something special. So Esther showed not her people, that she was Jewish, because Mordecai told her not to. Now Mordecai, every day he came and he walked the city gates and he looked to see what was happening with Esther, because he knew if the king doesn't marry her, where is she going to end up? What is she going to do for a living? There's no one to take care of her. So he looked after her. Now they were getting ready to come in front of the king, and it says for 1 whole year they were supposed to, for the days that they're perfect, they were supposed to, for 6 months they had oil of myrrh, and 6 months they had sweet odors. So for a whole year they went to I don't know what kind of oil or what kind of sweet odors they used, but I can tell you this. The other day, I was working underneath the machine. I had to change a hose on a diesel fuel. Diesel fuel came down all over me, and for about 3 days, I smelled like diesel fuel. So I can only imagine if I would put sweet odors on me for 6 months. I bet if Esther walked past you, she smelled like a flower or whatever they put on her. So if she would walk past the king, he'd be like, wow, what a woman. So that's exactly what happened, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all of them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto the king in the 7th year of his reign. So remember, in the 3rd year is when he had this big feast. It's been the 7th year now, so 4 years the king did not have a queen. And it says, the king loved Esther above all the other women. She obtained grace and favor, and he put a royal crown upon her head. So she was the new queen. And she was the new queen. He made another feast. They celebrated. But there are some people who don't like to see when people are happy, they become jealous. And that was the case with these 2 men. As the king sat on his chair, they became jealous over the king, and they started making a plan or a plot how they could kill this king. Well, Mordecai happened to be in the court that day, or somehow he overheard the plan that these 2 men were going to kill the king. And he made Esther aware of it, because Mordecai and Esther used to talk. So he said, you need to go to the king and tell them that there are 2 men in his courtyard who are trying to kill him. So Esther went and told the king. The king searched out the men and found out this was true. They were really gonna kill him. So he turned around and got rid of these 2 guys before they got rid of him. Now he didn't have 2 men to take care of him or look after him. We'd say they'd be his security guards. So he had to appoint another one. So he said, well, I know a guy named Haman, an Agagite, and I will appoint him to be my security guard. And so he appointed him, and he was up so high that everyone was supposed to bow down to this Haman guy. And they used to all bow down, everyone except Mordecai. See, Mordecai was a Jew, and he believed you should only bow down to God, and he was correct. At first, Haman didn't recognize it. Everyone bowed down. He was just taking everything in. He forgot to look back in the crowd and see, because Mordecai didn't do it in the open. He just stood back maybe by a pillar or out of sight. But the other people recognized, the guys next to him were like, why aren't you bowing? He said, I'm a Jew. I don't bow to nobody. And then those people went and told Haman that, hey, Mordecai isn't bowing to you. Now, every time Mordecai would walk in, he would look for, every time Haman would walk in and everyone would bow, he would look for the one person who wasn't bowing, and Mordecai refused. And that's exactly how we are. We overlook all the good and we focus on the one problem. That was Haman's problem, Mordecai. He got so mad. Every day he'd look and Mordecai would not bow. And the anger just built up and built up. And now there's a little bit of told him that he was supposed to go over in the city and kill everyone. Kill the king, the women, the children, the sheep, the goats. What did King Samuel do? He disobeyed God. He went over into that city. He killed everything except the king Agag and the best sheep and stuff, and he brought it back. And Samuel said, what is this that I hear? He said, it's the sheep that I want to offer to God. And Samuel the prophet said, obedience is better than sacrifice. You were supposed to kill everyone and everything. And Saul disobeyed, and now this is where this Agagite comes from, Haman, and he still hates the Jews. If they would have killed all of these people, this problem wouldn't be here, but they disobeyed God. So now they have another problem. Now, because he hated Mordecai, he hated him so much, he found out that he's a Jew, he had a bad temper too. No wonder these two worked so well together. He said, not only do I want Mordecai killed, I want all the Jews dead. And he said, I want this to go out in one day. One day I want all the Jews to die. And he asked the king, he said, there's people who don't obey your laws and they don't really mingle with us. The king didn't know who he was talking about. So he said, sure, let a decree go out and we can get rid of all these if they don't obey by our laws. Well, come to find out, it was Mordecai and his wife, Esther, was involved, which he did not know that she was a Jew, which he didn't even know it was the Jews he was talking about. So Mordecai, when he heard that this decree went out, of course he was sad, and he sat in sackcloth. All the people, when they heard this decree that went out and said, in one day all the Jews are going to die, they dressed in sackcloth and sat around and mourned. And Esther seen them, and she said, what is going on? She didn't know. And Mordecai sent a letter, sent the decree to Esther and said, this is what the king has ordered. All of us are going to die in one day. And he said, you are also a Jew. And they're going to find out one way or another that you're a Jew and your life is at stake as well. And Esther said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, you're the queen. Go talk to the king about it. She said, Mordecai, the king hasn't called me in 30 days. There's a law. It's illegal for me to go inside the king's courtroom if he hasn't called me. And this is where I love this part of the story. So Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. He said, think not that thou wilt escape. He said, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall come an enlargement, and deliverance shall arise for the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. Because Mordecai knew that God had promised to save the Jews and give them the land. God had promised Abraham that they're going to have land forever. And so he was explaining this to Esther, and he said, if you don't, not a mediator, if you don't step in for us at this time, God will find another way, but you will be in danger. Then he said, and who knoweth whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this? So he was reminding her, isn't this why God brought you for such a time as this? And it clicked in Esther's mind. Oh yeah, I was a little orphan girl. Look how God raised me up here. So she said, okay, go gather all the Jews. I can't do this by myself. Go gather all the Jews, fast and pray, and then me and my maidens will do likewise. and I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. So she was willing to give her life. So what I want you kids to stick out is the verse that says, for such a time as this. Now it's interesting. We'll continue the rest of the chapter next time I'm up. There's 10 chapters. I got to 5. But God's name is never mentioned in this whole book of Esther. Not one time is God's name mentioned. But we see God's hand in everything as he's moving the puzzles, or we'd say the chess pieces around the board to make everything come together. So, example, at just the right time, Mordecai adopted Esther because she had no father and mother. If he wouldn't have adopted her, where would Esther be at this time? At just the right time, Esther replaced Queen Vashti. At just the right time, Mordecai heard of the plot that they were going to kill the king. At just the right time, Esther visited the king, and we'll see that she obtained favor and she was not killed. So, God keeps record of all these stories in the Bible so we can learn more of God. And God is keeping every one of your guys' story right now, or our story. I'm going to give you an example how you can use this. I'm going to make this personal. So here's a bit of my story. We would say, Reuben, was a young married man. I was learning responsibility and learning to trust God. And for such a time as this, God wanted to bless me with a healthy baby boy named Micah. But just down the hallway, there was a stillborn. So that shook me. I reached out to God. And then to remind me of that trust, 2 years later, I was coming home from work. And I get out of my work truck, take my lunch pail, and go around the back. Micah's outside. He goes around the front. The driver leaves, and he drives right over Micah. Pushes him down on the ground. But at just the right time, Micah sat up and held his head, and the truck tire went right past his head. So do you see how God, at just the right time, God can make everything come together? God has a plan for Micah. God has a plan for each one of you. So we would say that Esther knew the only way to save her people was put her life in jeopardy, and there was a chance she might die. But there was a law in effect that said, if you're a Jew, you're going to die that one day. There was a law in effect. Now, you children need to know that there is a law in effect today in the Bible that says the wages of sin is death. So just like back then, if you were a Jew, you were on the death penalty. Today, if we've sinned, we're on the death penalty. So, is there anyone you children can think of that was willing to risk his life to save us? Who would that have been? Micah? Jesus, exactly. And Romans 5:6 says, at just the right time, Jesus came and died for us sinners. Just the right time. So as I stand here, I want to tell you children, it is just the right time to believe, to trust, and take Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Okay? So with that, you guys are dismissed.